Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L, and I am here to review Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon, Volume 18. Woo. And also a little bit of Volume 19 just because of the nature of the book. Alright, hey everyone. Kind of different video, but it's okay. I do different videos on the channel these days. Anyway, how to pick up, is it wrong to try to pick up girls in a dungeon? Very quick background for why I'm doing this. I was watching the anime, I caught up, and then when I got to the point where there's no more episodes, I'm thinking like, well shit, I'm gonna go and just read this. I have all the books, I love them. For those that don't know, this is the first time seeing me, I'm a really big fan of how to pick up girls. I'm a really big fan of Danmachi. I love the book. It inspires me a lot. I study a lot of Danmachi's style because when I was younger, I really loved the style. And so we're here with book 18, and I'm not sure if you can tell, but like this is a much thicker book than the regular. It comes in at over 430 pages. It's a pretty chunky book, and of course, you know, I feel like the Danmachi author Omori, I feel like Omori has a very specific kind of style, and I've said a lot of things about Danmachi in the past because I love Danmachi so much. But one of the things with it is that the writing style, when it's in third-person narration mode, is very difficult to adapt into the anime. Fundamentally, this is a book that is not designed to be adapted into anime. Fundamentally, the way that Omori works, it's on full display here, and you know, I'm gonna say a lot of things, but fundamentally I want everyone to know that I love Danmachi. But I'm going to talk about this book both as a fan and also as someone trying to sell books on the internet, because there, you know, the me today that looks at Danmachi is different than the me of 3 years ago in that sense, and that might be worthwhile for some people if they want to like get a sense of what I think about the book, or what I think about in general, like when it comes to like the difficulties of writing a light novel and like the considerations of your audience and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, let's start with the nice stuff first. Overall, book 18, it covers where we're at roughly at the anime. After episode 9, you're pretty much entering the territory of, or like at episode 9 or after, right there, you're entering the territory of volume 18. And volume 18, this is 300 pages of battle, which is pretty impressive. It's 100 pages of like setup and 300 pages of battle. Overall, in the book, you get the resolution of the current anime season 4's ending. You get that resolution. What happens to Freya, you know by the end of the book. How we get to the ending, you know by the end of the book. The fallout, this will be a point. The fallout of the situation, you don't actually find out properly until book 19, which is unfortunate. I'm going to talk about that for a little bit because I actually don't agree with that particular thing when it comes to Danmachi. But overall, it has a lot of really cool moments. There's a good moment for Welf in there. I thoroughly enjoyed getting to the end of it, and the big crux of the book is this whole idea about Freya. We're now entering spoiler territory. If you don't know what's gonna happen, like, bro. But the big crux of the book is Freya, and the idea about saving Freya. So, you know, when we're talking about like the way that the main idea is conveyed, and it's really tricky in Danmachi because they introduce the situation with Seer and then Horn. So you have Freya, Horn, and Seer as these three aspects in here, and fundamentally what we're trying to do by the end of the book is getting Freya to acknowledge her identity. And so, like, one thing that Bell says throughout the book is like he wants to know Freya's true self. And I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of confused as to where we were going until like there was one magic phrase towards the last quarter of the book that said, "Oh, okay, I understand what the situation was." And in a way, I guess it was pretty clever with what the author decided to do. And it's pretty funny too, because like there was a thing in the author notes where he was talking about how his editor had him change a horrible idea about Seer being Freya with makeup, or sorry, without makeup or something like that. You know, like they went for a more convoluted solution, but I think it made for a more interesting dynamic. And the final answer that we end off on for Freya, I actually think was really fair. But I do think it kind of got lost in Danmachi's sentimentalities as we are getting there. Personally, I would say. But overall, I enjoyed reading book 18. Now, unfortunately, I would say like ain't a well, no book is perfect, but book 18 does have a lot of moments where you just go, oh, like it has a lot of moments where you go like that. A lot of it's towards the end with the battles with people that you probably don't really care about because they're dicks. And a lot of it's like sometimes it feels like there's a little bit of regurgitation going on. So towards the last couple battles, once they don't really involve Bell and once you have a sense for the battlefield, you're kind of gonna start glazing over because honestly, some of the battles, especially the one with the 4 Prooms, those are pretty much deadlocked. Those are like just there's barely any progress happening in them after a certain point, and you're just pretty much waiting for the final blow to be dealt. It was a slog for those ones, and if you were to like look at it from like a critical point of view, it's really because of the timing. Danmachi is very slow in terms of how much time passes. I mean, we're only a half of a year since the beginning of the series in universe. And so because of that slowness, because the author has a fixation on kind of like showing you almost every second of a critical moment, we end up in those kind of slogs. So the book does have a few moments towards the end where it's just like, I don't care. I like this paragraph of action will change nothing. Nothing will change. It is just fluff, much like this segment right now is fluff. And so it has a few of those, but I didn't start skipping around until the very end. And then, of course, I came back and read it, but like it was not like I was gaining anything from coming back and reading it because it's just fluff. So that's kind of unfortunate. But I know why it happens. And, you know, here's where it gets like tricky. And I'll dive in on this a little bit later. But if Danmachi was a series that they adapted faithfully, I would understand why. But Danmachi gets bastardized in its adaptations. And now we will go into the next segment where we're talking about, I don't think the anime can actually do book 18 justice. You might also notice I have this. It's because I'm going to talk about a random passage, but I just had to mark the random passage. So I've said this a lot about Danmachi, and I think book 18 is like really leaning into that particular challenge, but Danmachi is very hard to adapt. And that is because the majority of like the really cool lines are locked into third person narration, and the anime has never been able to properly express the third person narration. It's never been able to do it. Even looking at the episodes before episode 8, I get kind of sad because I can see that this book, I can see that there was build up about certain things, and you're just not going to get to see that build up in the anime because they just had to nix it. And it's just so unfortunate, because like the build up in the third person narration really makes it better. And when you strip the third person narration, you're left with Bell, and Bell can barely get words out. I feel like he's getting worse and worse with every passing book. Like sometimes the kid can barely get a word out without stammering, and it's a little bit unfortunate. I think I've kind of outgrown it. That's why it's bothering me a little bit more. I've had a lot of problems specifically with the Bell archetype of character in my own work, so I'm going through war flashbacks. But anyway, let's do this properly. Overall, it's more of Danmachi. I think if I would say that there's anything that could have been improved, it has to be the epilogue, which we will talk about, and it also has to be the amount of time that was spent just exaggerating or reiterating emotions of characters. The third person narrator was way too strong here. This book could have been 100 pages shorter, I am sure. But the thing is, like, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It just kind of depends on like what situation. Like, anyway, let's get into like the bigger critiques. That's the positive part of the video, where I say everything that was awesome and like point out like the overview of like the bad problems. Let's get into like very specific situations here with book 18 as according to what I'm passionate about. This is going to be a critical spot, and then at the end of the video I will go through the spots that I really liked, that I thought were like, whoa, that was cool. I think that'll be fair. Anyway, let's start with a pretty big criticism I have about the epilogue. So this is my personal bias, but this is what, like, personally, I don't care about the fights when it comes to the novel stories. I care more about what happens immediately after the fight, so the fallout phase. So my epilogue will be like relatively long, or like there will be a lot of down period after the main conflict. And for me, like, I think you should be doing this when you're doing a big series, because it's a big series. and I think it makes things awkward sometimes as well. But for Danmachi, you have like what 420 pages of main story. Like the final parts before you go into the epilogue are pretty much the words "her first love ended." Also, like Danmachi has so much white space. It's just like, like you don't see this in like Brandon Sanderson's or anything like that. I actually like looking at this. So for those who don't know, I'm doing a translation project for novels, and I've noticed that some particularities of the Japanese language got stuck in this in this translation, and I just think it is a damn shame, because like it just makes some of the words just look it makes the pages look pretty ugly, and some of the stuff is just nonsensical. But I think they probably did it because they didn't want people complaining at them for why is chapter 18 look like a smaller book, or sorry, why does volume 18 look like a smaller book compared to the Japanese version, which fair, but like it's ugly. It's an unfortunate aspect to this whole thing, I think, in my opinion. I might be wrong. I'm probably not. Anyway, the epilogue is from pages 422 to 437. That's not even 20 pages of epilogue. I'm not a fan of that. I feel, especially because during the battles here, a lot of critical things end up happening, like that kind of change the status quo. One thing with Haruhime and one thing with Liu. So when you have that kind of stuff, I would really like more epilogue, because I kind of want to set up, what's the fallout of the situation and what is the new normal? That's what I want to do. And my personal philosophy about these things, as a person that has sold over 60,000 books, is I think everything should be done in one story. I think everything that pertains to the fallout of your situation should be done here and now. That's my personal style. That's the style that works with my particular niche. I would think it would work here. So I'm not a fan of how short the epilogue is. For the amount of time that you're just sitting around watching people just struggle, I wish we had more fun time, like at the end, especially in a book like this where it's just so difficult the entirety of so difficult for a good chunk of the time, where people are just falling down, especially with the way that Danmachi treats its characters. Like, I would have liked more. I'm switching over to like volume 19 very quickly, and the reason I do that is because volume 19, the first chapter picks up just like a day or two after the events of volume 18, and like it covers everything that you would want to know about Fallout. It covers everything about the direct consequences of what was happening in volume 18. So this is honestly a stylistic point. But on a stylistic point of view, I really think that the first chapter of volume 19, because of how much it covers what the Freya family is doing now, really should have been at the end of volume 18. Like, that's just appropriate. Like, that just doesn't make sense to make people wait to know what the exact ending or what the exact situation after your conflict is. Like, after your conflict, you set up the new normal, and I just think they kind of lost sight of that. I think it's ridiculous to have to wait. What was the publication dates on these things? Like, roughly, I think it's, I think it's a year, but let's say 6 months. I think it's unreasonable to have to wait 6 months for the new normal to be established, especially when it's so pertaining to Freya. It's just really unfortunate because so much of the first chapter of volume 19 is dedicated to just settling what happened after volume 18's big event. That being the Familia, I can spoil it because we're right in spoiler mode. The Familia War. Yeah, so that was just really odd. I think it must be a publication issue. I think it must just be an issue with timing, or like even with the page length, that they're like, bro, let's just put the epilogue in the other book. Like, that's what I think. It has to be something having to do with the size of this. As for the editor, I do wonder why the editor didn't cut this down, because there is so much unnecessary stuff. And at that point, let's move into like Danmachi's general style when it comes to the third-person narrator. So the third-person narrator, very hard to actually ever adapt this in an anime. And already, like the thing with the Danmachi is that third-person narrator is where all the soul is. So you don't adapt that, and then you're stuck with Bell, who doesn't actually express his feelings. The third-person narrator does a better job of expressing Bell's feelings than he does, because otherwise, heck, man, if you're looking at Bell, actually, let's go look at Bell at his best. All right, this is very quickly from volume 19 because it's just easier to pluck it out there. But Hedin said, "How long are you planning to sleep, fool?" Gufu? That's Bell. Ah, master, Bell says after noticing that Head up. The guy tells him to get up, and then Bell is just, why are you apparently taking care of me? And of course, there's ellipses between the and the why and the you and apparently. Hedden like is much more eloquent than the kid is. Then we go into where did you get those wounds? And that's like Bell again asking Hedden about things. Like it's just funny because like, when you go into the morbid, you have Bell saying or you have Bell saying and then after Hedden gives him another proper response, after the second punch I fought back, Bell says, oh. And then when Hedden gives him another response, Bell says, right, I can imagine him doing that. And then after that, in his narration, Bell says, right. And then when he's having his little internal monologue, he's saying, but, ... if it weren't for him, ... So, you know, I feel like to some degree, Bell is losing his grammar. Like, Bell is losing his language. I mean, look at this. Goddess. I'm sure Miss Sear is sorry about what she did. You really shouldn't. So, you know, I'm being a little bit harsher about this, but it just doesn't sound good. And mind you, I did do a book where I actually my characters ended up a lot with Bell's particular speech pattern, and people didn't like it. It didn't review that well on that aspect in particular. So, you know, that's one of those lessons that I look a little bit harshly on, just because I've kind of opened my eyes to how annoying that actually is. And just in Bell's situation, it's because he's so passive and he's unable to get like a proper thought out, especially in this book where things get really difficult with Freya. It's just like, bro, I kind of wish you were more competent. I kind of wish you could speak in full sentences. It's kind of unfortunate that you can't. I feel like you have brain damage. I feel bad for him. Anyway, I went on a whole little rant there about Bell, but it's just unfortunate. You want your characters to be cool, and it's just unfortunate that Bell just struggles so much to get a proper sentence out when he's around pretty girls or like dealing with something relatively difficult. Thank God, like the final little conclusion here was actually really good. Anyway, going back to this though, we were talking about Danmachi's strengths, which is the third-person narrator, but it's also its weaknesses. Just because in this particular book you have so much over narration that you could have just cut it out. I'll give you a quick little bit about just to see where the fluff is. So this is just a random page that I picked out. The bed almost looked like a coffin, as if the girl had slipped into her eternal slumber. Nothing wrong with that line. Her heart ached and she almost slumped to the ground. Anya understood why the rough werewolf had brought her there. Don't really have to put in the rough there because we already know beats a rough werewolf, but like that's just, you know, it's all little things that just kind of add up. He was telling her to listen, to learn what was true and what was real, what the girl who had pushed Anya to destruction really wanted. So this is something that the Danmachi author does, like the reiteration. Again, in a regular situation, this probably wouldn't be that bad, but when the majority of the book is reiterations, it's just for every situation, it just gets kind of hard to like slog through it. Anyway, but Anya couldn't do it. She was still terrified of Freya laughing at her again, of Seer betraying her. If the same cruel and changing reality awaited her, Anya would be able to stand back up again. Covering her mouth with her hands to keep herself from sobbing, Anya somehow managed to bring her spasming lungs back under control as she stood in front of the bed, standing there trembling, unable to ask anything. Okay, so overall, you can see though, that's a really cool scene. Like, she's struggling a lot. It's just unfortunate we're dealing with such a minor character. That's the really unfortunate part. Just jumping to another random spot. Several teardrops fell at her feet. The translucent tears splashed against the marble floor and shivered in the light. Her voice was trembling. The cat's tears didn't stop. Renoa was teary. Chloe hid her eyes behind her hair, and Mia watched as Anya looked up. Tears fell from both of her eyes. Her face was a mess. The cat that had been abandoned still mewed. So again, it's just, there's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of like extra details for the scene that you don't really need. Like, you don't really need translucent tears, especially when you're in a situation where you've been doing this the whole time. It's just rough. There are other parts where you look at the narration, it's like, no, this is 100% reasonable. Like whenever you're doing the battle narration, because there's a lot of battles, so you have a lot of work, you have a lot of staging that happens. That's perfectly fine. But when you get into those really slow emotional moments, or when you have people suddenly talking or having their monologues during the middle, or sorry, having their backstories fleshed out during the middle of the fight, it just slows everything down. And again, it's unfortunate because the anime won't even do it the justice of going in here and actually playing it out the way the words want it to be played out. It's the unfortunate bit. Like, what's the point of doing all that narration? Anyway, that's one of the things there. I think the book could have been 100 pages shorter, probably. Now, on defense though, to defend the author and why I think this happens, especially this late in the game, I think the author, this reeks to me like a thing that happens is like one problem is reiterated in 3 different ways from 3 different angles, and when that kind of stuff happens, in my experience, like I know when I do it, but at this point, I think a lot of it is the product of reader feedback. So that's why I really can't be like too angry at the author about this. I think the author sees people misinterpreting some things, and so he's made it a mission to make sure things are like super 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 clear. And that's why I think we have so much reiteration, especially with the Freya situation here. With Freya, the emotional delicacy that is required in the Freya situation, I can see why there would be so much overexpression of this particular situation. Now, one thing here, let's talk about the Freya situation as well. And this isn't really a negative critique or a positive comment, but one of the things I wish, and praise, you know what, I'm going to start praising. Because I already talked about the epilogue, which was my biggest gripe, and just the general issue with the narration. I found going through this book in my head, I kept thinking to myself, bro, just harem. Just do the harem route. I know that you shouldn't because of the way that Belle's whole character works. But this is really at the point where it's just like, man, this is freaking painful, man. This is freaking painful. It's rough. I feel bad for Freya. And I know she's crazy. But she's the goddess of love, so I think she's allowed to be crazy, bro. I think she's allowed. But yeah, no, to spoil it, because I assume that you already read the book too, this ultimately ends with Belle rejecting her another time. He did it once and he did it again. And this time he made sure that he made sure to tell her, yo, there's no chance this is happening. It's unfortunate because like throughout all of this, I'm just thinking to myself, man, I wish we could just do the harem route for poor Seer here. It was so rough. So props to the author for making me props to the author for making me want a better world for Freya. That was it was just so painful going through that, knowing that this kid was gonna break her heart anyway. That's why I like her more. And you know what? I'm so tired of Danmachi like flirting with the idea of this is going to be a harem story, because you have so much girls fall in love with him when this guy's just going to go and reject every single one of these girls. Like, man, I hope he cries after every girl he rejects. I hope it's difficult and painful, because this kid is just he's giving himself the biggest problem. I love that in volume 19 he references his grandpa, and his grandpa's memory is him telling him to switch places with him. Yeah, no, man. This is one of those moments. So since I'm talking about the cool moments now, something I really enjoyed. There were a few standout moments here. Overall, what happens to the Galewind throughout the book when she comes back with that massive power up is like, whoa, that felt so good. And it felt so good to have Hermes like making it official, like, yeah, this is awesome. I love that. Wealth. I was really worried for Wealth here, but if you want to talk about where that third person narration is awesome, it is so good at like expressing how pathetic, how ugly, how futile, how shame-inducing anything is. Oh, it is so good at that. Because Wealth, man, like, it was just perfect. The guy has a whole sequence, and this might be my favorite moment, where he hears the message. He's there. He can't move. He got beaten up earlier. Like, setting up his little villain there too was awesome. He can't move. He like dumps some potion on the floor. He's licking it up like a dog. He's still like on his. He's still collapsed on the ground. I don't remember exactly the details. He's still collapsed on the ground. Another character is over in the distance watching him. This character, he's not going to help him. He's not going to stop him, because anyone trying to do their best, even if they suck, is still worthwhile. And it actually like matches back to the character that was watching, which was amazing. And then you got your payoff at the final moment when Belle really needs it. Wealth comes in and continues a strategy that he was trying to employ before he got cut down, and he got to give a nice middle finger to his enemy for the volume. That was amazing. That was one of the best moments in the book. I really loved it. I wish we had more of the minor characters but I can appreciate that they were able to get that one in. And actually, the way that it went, because like when Wealth went down to when he got back, it took so long to get there. But you know what? When it was there, and it felt really freaking good. But that was probably like one of my favorite moments. There's other like big highlights, such as who shows up in the battle against Otter and all that kind of stuff. The other moment in the book that made me go like, wow, was actually with the Gulliver brothers. So there's a whole little thing, a story that about how Freya got the Gulliver brothers, and it involved Freya sleeping for 4 nights with a dwarf, 1 night for each of the brothers, because the dwarf had enslaved them. And I thought that whole sequence where Freya says like, yeah, she would do it because like the brothers were worth it, that was definitely a moment where I just like took a second to be like, that's a really good expression of a goddess of love. I think that's a really novel interpretation. I think that's a really novel implementation of a goddess of love. That was so sophisticated. It was so good. And the brothers went and beat up the dwarf, and like, yeah, that was pretty awesome. But yeah, no, Freya like definitely, it's ironic, but I think Freya got like a lot of character done in terms of like all the little flashbacks that that her followers had thinking of her in this particular book. So it's interesting because Freya herself, like, she's in a point of identity crisis throughout Volume 18. So she's not really doing a lot of positive work for herself. It's really those followers of her that are filling out her character a bit more and like actually make her like really interesting, like a lot more interesting than she has been before. That moment with the Gulliver brothers by far stands out in my head. I really love that. I think that was really, really good. Definitely a shining moment. If we were to talk about my favorite moments, it's definitely Welf's moment and that little backstory with Freya and the Gulliver brothers. I really hope I'm pronouncing their name right. But overall, how long is the video? 30 minutes. You know, like, honestly, this kind of stuff, I really should just be going chapter by chapter. But then, you know, to analyze every chapter would just be overkill. One last moment I really enjoyed quite a bit. Hedin. He had a great betrayal. It made sense. I liked him calling everyone zealous because that's what they are. You were really dealing with different expressions of love, and it was cool to see it play out. Let me see any other like big moments that stick out in my head. You know what? Can't recall any right now. I talked about the ones that I really enjoyed. But yeah, Volume 18 of Danmachi. Overall, I sit down and I just think to myself, the majority of this stuff ain't gonna get into the anime. They're not gonna be able to cover the majority of this stuff. Anyway, I'm gonna probably wrap it up there. Overall, Volume 18, I really enjoyed it. I think some of the stuff that happened in there was really cool. I wish the epilogue was longer. I thought that the ending that we got with Freya was relatively sophisticated. I kind of wish that this was a harem book and like Bell could just be a little bit more proactive in things that he does. But hey, whatever. It's more of Danmachi. Oh, you know what? Also, the War God. The War God having his moment. That was pretty good. If actually that moment was so short. If there was ever going to be a moment that should have been built up, it should have been his beatdown of a bunch of Freya people. I would have taken that instead of like whatever else we got. But overall, Danmachi Volume 18, I enjoyed it. I don't regret reading the book. I wish some things were different, but yeah, my biggest thing is that I think 100 pages you can take out of this book and it wouldn't really be hurt. And even still, the anime wouldn't be able to do it justice. Guys, let me know what you thought down below of Volume 18. Let me know what your favorite moments were in Volume 18. What did you love the most? And yeah, till next time. I hope you have an absolutely great day.